Hello guys, this is Christian and you're welcome back to the Don't Have channel. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through how you can use lambda functions to solve nonlinear equations. Okay, so when you're given a nonlinear equation, you can find your roots out of it using lambda function. Alright, so what is lambda function in Python? So lambda function in Python basically means anonymous function. Okay, when we say anonymous functions, as the name implies, a function without a name. So let's look at this function here. This function we've declared by giving it a def keyword and then an identifier, which is the name of the function. Okay. So in future, if you want to call this function, you have to call it by the name. And inside it, let me clear this here. Okay. So inside it, we have the return keyword here, which is actually returning this string. Okay. So when you call this function in future, it's going to return the string for us. So that is basically what the actual function in Python is being written or can be implemented. So let's run this function here. Alright. And then here what we are doing here is we are calling the function, and whatever we get out of that function, we are storing it inside a variable. Okay. So variable is basically like a container which we use to store data. Okay, so whatever we get here, we are going to print it to the console here. So now let's run this and see. All right, so we are getting this is from an example function. Okay, which is actually what we return when we implemented this function. Okay, so that is basically how actual functions in Python works. This is a second example of Python function in Python. So what you are doing here is a function, and then the name is add divide function. Okay, this add divide function takes in inputs, which is two parameters, and what we do here is we add the parameters and then we divide it by 2 and we return the quotient. Okay, so this is actually a simple mathematics we are doing here. Let's run this function. All right, so now what we are going to do here is we are going to set two variables. Okay, we have our 2 and our 4, and we are going to pass them as parameters. Okay, and then whatever we get from our add divide function, we will now store it inside our result variable, and then we will print the result variable here. So now let's run it, and before we run it, let's actually do the calculation ourselves. Okay, so here we are adding 1 and 2, so we are going to add this and that, which is 6, and then we are going to divide it by 2, and we are supposed to get 3 as our answer. Okay, so let's run this. All right, so we are getting 3.0, which is the answer we were expecting. Okay, so that is basically how functions in Python works. So now let's get into the main game. Okay, we want to know how we can implement these functions with Lambda. Okay, so let me say the goals of this function, we are going to implement them using Lambda function. Okay, so basically this is how we use Lambda function. Okay, you call the function, it doesn't have a name. Okay, this Lambda here you see is actually calling the Lambda function. It's a keyword that is used to call the Lambda function in Python. We are not going to go into details with that, but we are just going to know how we can implement functions using Lambda function. Okay, so what you are doing here is we call the Lambda function, and since the first one we don't have, let me scroll to the top, we don't have any parameter here, we are just going to bring our colon and then our string we want to return. So after the colon is what we want to do and then return. Okay, and then from there we can just store it inside our example variable, and then we can call it here. Okay, so now let's run this. In the output we are expecting from here is supposed to be the same as the output we had for the first function. Okay, so let's run this. All right, so we are getting, this is an example of it's supposed to be off, don't worry, this is an example Lambda function. Okay, so this is actually what we are getting. Now let's go to the next one. Here the add divide function This is it. We are now going to implement this. Now count the number. Let me comment, delete the comments and just count the number of lines we are using to just do this simple mathematics. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, right? 5, 6, 7. Okay, and plus the printing is 8. All right. Now let's see how we can implement that same function using that same mathematics or arithmetic using lambda function. Okay, so now as you can see here, we call a lambda function. We pass in our parameters, our 1 and 2. Okay, these are the parameters we are passing, and then you add the parameters and divide it by 2. Just simple as that. And when we are done, we can now store it inside this variable, call it, and pass in our parameters, which is 2 and 4. And now our end product or our resource is going to be 3, right? All right, so you see you're getting 3 here. So you can see, you can count the number of lines we used here, which is much smaller than the one we use for the actual function. Okay, so it basically saves lines, and once it saves lines, it saves time. Okay, so now what are we going to do with it? Now we are going to use lambda functions to solve our non-linear equations. Okay, so but that is basically what we want to do. Okay, so let me explain this to you, and then probably we start test ourselves. Okay, so this is the function, and in Python this is how we can implement it. So x star star power 3. Okay, so that is how we write a variable to a power in Python. Okay, and then we can multiply it by x star x. Okay, so that is the multiplication down we added here. Sorry, so now let's try and implement it using lambda. So as you can see here, we call our lambda keyword, and then we pass in our parameter, which is x, then x star star, which means raised to the power 3, minus 3 star x, which is 3 multiply x plus 1. Okay, so now let's run this and see what we get. 19. So that is what we expect. Okay, so now down here we have some tests for ourselves. Okay, so we are going to implement these nonlinear functions using lambda. Okay, so quickly let's try and do. So we are going to call lambda keyword, and then we are going to pass in our parameter, and then from there we are going to call x raised to the power 2 minus x multiply 2, multiply x, and then 0.5, and let's try and do for this one too. So lambda, and then here we have 2 parameters, raised to the power 3 minus y minus 1, and then for the last one we're going to pass in our parameter x raised to the power x, okay, minus x. All right, I think that's it. So x raised to the power 2 minus 2 multiplying x plus 0.5, and here too x raised to the power 3 minus 1 minus 1. So let's run them quickly. Let's run it, and then the last one. Okay, so this is the texting. Let's see whether we got it correct. All right, so we had it correct. Thank you very much for being with me. See you next.